So we have goodies. If this can work, yeah. Yeah. We have for you 4 handouts, which are maps, really, of how campaigns and movements can evolve. People have thought about this, have observed, studied civil rights movement, the anti-nuclear movement, and whatnot. So the first one you'll get at the end, because we want all of the attention on us, not on paper at this point, is one that Mary gave us. Stages of escalation of nonviolent campaigns. That comes from, you remember the name?
Theodor Eber, a German, very pivotal in the middle of the 20th century, did a lot of documentation of civil resistance in Germany in 1953, which was crushed very badly, and therefore made what happened in East Germany in 1989 all the more significant.
So you have this matrix basically of 3 stages that nonviolent campaigns can go through, where that actually helps also positioning what tactics may go first, what tactics may go second, and that. There's a second framework, which is more of a longer arc. It's called the 5 stages of a strategy for a living revolution. It comes from George Lakey. And you'll recognize things that were in our thing. Like you start with cultural preparation, what we call in French conscientisation. I think it's the same thing yeah. So all the way to massive non-cooperation. And that. So these might just help you anchor the knowledge. We have a full write-up on that. So we'll not. 6 stages of nonviolent campaigns from Martin Luther King. That's basically the structure out of his letter from Birmingham jail, right?
Can I just
Please.
Put in on you because in our planning, Philippe wanted me to speak and I wanted him to speak, so we'll see what we've done at the time. But let me just say, for those of you who are interested in research and found yourselves at the beginning, investigation, Martin Luther King picked up Gandhi's emphasis. Gandhi began every campaign with investigation. He considered this absolutely the foundation for anything and everything. Martin Luther King studied Gandhi nightly once the Montgomery bus boycott began, and professional tutors arrived from across the country, from the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which I mentioned before the film. This is an organization that came into existence in Britain around the time of World War I, and it's still training all over the world. There's one in the United States also. Philippe, all of which is to say, you know, that Gandhi and Martin Luther King and the people in this room grasp the fact that preparation and planning and research and planning of strategy is the fundamental building block.
It is. Thank you. And one last handout you'll get, and there's also a write-up about that, is the 8 stages of successful social movements by Bill Moyers, who studied in particular the resistance movement against the Vietnam or Indochina wars, the anti-nuclear movement. There's some interesting things there because you see the curves, and one of them is the public awareness, which is not the same as public opposition about a policy. And it's a more complex matrix, but it's basically, 3 major phases as well. You build up. Remember the idea of the build up that came up early? You gave us that nugget. Thank you. And then how the relationship between the activists, organizers, and the larger mass population, ordinary folks, how that important that is. And then the public support for movement alternatives, which may come also later, and the rates vary. What this is useful for instance, is you sometimes have moments where you realize, you think you're failing. It was very obvious. Dave Dellinger in More Power Than We Know talks about that, how the movement to oppose the Vietnam War in the US thought it was totally failing right at the moment when it was achieving majority opinion. And what that did is that some of the activists went into violent bombings. We're losing, so all we must do now is destroy the US society, which is waging war on the world, was basically the line, right? And so that despair came to, really hurt the movement at a time when it was winning. So none of these are perfect. None of these are, orthodoxy. They're just like little maps. And we're still perhaps, at the time of the Middle Ages where like the continents are just these vague things yet. And maybe there's a lot more granularity we should build to that. How do we sustain a movement? How do we avoid depletion? How do we build successful movements? How do we avoid failure? And it seems to us at ICNC that the main thing is the more you study it, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Pretty basic. But you wouldn't believe how many people just think social movements are just this, like in the Middle Ages again, you put some wheat in a bag and mice is going to appear. Spontaneous generation. That's how the social science still thinks about social movements, is, bad conditions generate movements. False.
May also add there is another extreme when someone wants to say that social movements are manipulated. They say everything is plotted, all these people are, that's another extreme, yes. Power structures often like to say this, especially in authoritarian states. It's all enemies from the State Department, from anywhere, like aliens coming and plotting them.
And the grain of truth in that is that they're not foolish enough to think that leaderless movements are possible. They have an understanding that leadership is required. They know it is essential. And therefore, I think our job is to push those multiple leaderships. That leadership is a set of skills, and many different skills are needed. We need people to do maintenance work, like personal relationship work. We need people with vision. We need people with, hardcore organizing skills. We need people who will keep the lists. All of these are very, very important. Raise money. So how are movements successful? How are movements sustainable? There's the movement and the movement of movements thing. There's the organizational thing. And thank you, Mary, for also raising the individual level of sustainability, which is also very important. To quote Dave Dellinger again, he said, in one's life, there are seasons of activism. That really helped me at a time when I had to pull out of that, an action here, urgent, urgent, an action there, urgent, urgent, another action because there's this other emergency. Anybody felt that ever? That there's, yes, always something urgent to do and not enough time to do it. The thing is, we never go at bed at night and say, oh, my job's done. Peace in the world, global justice, I'm done. So we need a way to sustain this, and pulling in and out sometimes is very important. Because when we fail to do that, we become a detriment to the movement. If you're totally depressed and all you do is get angry at people and aren't a motivator anymore, time for vacation. And it's all right to do that. Yeah. So hearing Mary and for me to be here, I want to say it's just very moving, because I know I'm getting to rub shoulders with giants. And Howard Zinn, who was the historian, wrote about SNCC and said, these are the new abolitionists. it's a book that changed my life because you realize how much courage it took. And I don't think we can take out of the sustainability equation the stuff we've got in the heart, in the gut, that belief. And of course, all the training and that is about that, but it's also about relationships. If movements aren't spontaneous generations, they're also about the people you know. And in fact, it's been proven, right? Probably some research that, the main gateway for people to get involved in movements is knowing people in the movement.
Yeah. That's backed by research, for sure.
And that's backed by research. So in that sense, sustainability is about your relationships here and maintaining them. Yes,
I was just going to ask about the whole idea of leaders of thought. We talked about leadership just now. I was thinking about the conceptual, the thought, because like with United Nations peacekeeping, it was driven by pragmatism, and pragmatism usually leads to conceptual drift, neither here nor there, and that's where I think the failures of that era was, because of course it looked successful because the Cold War froze it in place. So with movements as well, I think the whole idea of getting leaders of thought and persons that actually live the concept, or I don't know if you can understand what I'm saying.
I'm not sure I got that. Do you want to?
I was a bit confused about leadership when you talked about leadership just
Do we
now,
have
but I
time
was
for me to
thinking
say
that it's
something?
essential
Yes, go ahead, because
that you have leaders of thought and concept of the thought.
I think that your point is extremely important because, in fact, nonviolent action is thought into action. It's because thinking people have decided and recognized that if they don't take responsibility and become involved, there will be no change. So you put your finger on something excruciatingly important. With regard to the leadership, one of the things to remember, Adejo, is that movements thrust forward leaders that exemplify the movement. That is, in fact, what happened with Martin Luther King. If you know what the word dragoon means, dragoon, Martin Luther King was dragged into being the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. The actual boycott had been planned by the Women's Political Caucus for 3 years. The Black Women's Political Caucus in Montgomery had been planning an action for 3 years. When Rosa Parks figured out that she could find a bus that would allow her to sit all the way home, it was not because she had tired feet. She just wanted to sit all the way home. And once she was in prison, the Black Women's Political Caucus went into action, 73,000 circulars mimeographed overnight to organize staying off the buses by Monday morning. But Martin Luther King got almost tricked into becoming the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. They wanted him to be their exemplar. And I can't take any more of Philippe's time, but I have seen this over and over and over again in movements that I have studied, where the movement, in fact, pushes forward the thinking person that you're talking about, who is able to make the connection to action.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And he was also selected because he wasn't part of the local quibbles. He was new to town and therefore didn't have all this baggage and past, and that's a great story. And remember last night's story, the Nashville We Were Warriors movie. I mean, what a great example of how to make a movement sustainable. The emphasis on training again. And it's no surprise that so many people from that small group ended up leading a whole movement for a decade. And therefore, the time you spend designing your strategy, I remember asking Jim, well, was the boycott phase thought about before you went into the direct action? Because that's not clear when we watch the movie. And yes, they had planned that they would enter a phase for a boycott once the direct action was done. And so, once the level of public support and participation could be guaranteed. So, I mean, all these things are that sequencing those tactics and thinking strategically is very, very important. Before I'm done, you put me on the spot this morning saying you might hear about the thing you did in Quebec about anti-fracking. So I thought I should give a bit of an example. Yeah, so I got that. Just to tell you, I've been doing a lot of actions that were like, getting arrested thing. I was one of those people who sort of enjoyed almost. And this is, I want to apologize for my government, the Harper government, which is the worst climate bandit in the world right now. Worse, which is no small matter. So this is me getting arrested as an elf, delivering pieces of coal to Harper's home in Ottawa because he was a bad boy. This was just before Christmas. And the police who arrested us said, I'm going to have a bad day when I come home. And my children asked me, how come you've arrested Santa Claus? Anyway, so I wanted, and that's how I got involved into this whole dirty energy struggle, which I think is one of the pivotal struggles, at least in our countries, the ones that are consuming and producing and the tar sands and fracking. Anybody knows about fracking and this awful process where they destroy the ground, basically exploding the underneath, the rock underneath 2-3 kilometers deep, injecting water, which is forever lost and polluted, and for bubbles of gas, which represent about 2% of the gas that's in the resource. And then, of course, it's going to leak for thousands of years. Deadly methane, which is 25 more potent than CO2. Yeah. So I want to say this is a campaign I helped design because we thought there was a big risk in Quebec. There was a big movement, like that phase of everybody talking about it, and journalists were very key in that because it's a secretive industry. And one of our fear was that they were going to basically, sidetrack us. The whole movement was asking for a moratorium, a temporary stop to fracking in the province. And my concern, and this is my son, Colin, I'm very proud, we thought this was a danger for the movement because the government could give a 2-3 month moratorium and then everything would deflate. So we started this campaign asking, this is the Environmental Assessment Study Commission, and that was an act of defiance because the whole thing is controlled. And he got to speak, and everybody got up and said, we want a 1-generation moratorium, 20 years. Because if that resource is as valuable as you say, the U.S. is fracking the hell out of Pennsylvania and other places. So keep it in the ground. There's no hurry. The price can only go up, right? So it was devised as a way to go get the fence sitters. You don't have to agree that you have total opposition to fracking per se. I mean, it's very technical, getting it to explain. So, and the next step is we set out on a walk, 700-kilometer long, a whole month on the road, linking the villages that were going to be fracked. They were planning 20,000 fracking wells along the St. Lawrence River in Quebec. And so, and every night we'd have little skits showing what this is about, art and music and a bit of a speech. And when we got to Montreal, and I must say, us civil resistors are in a very tough place. And we need to prepare for it. Because there are institutions, they're very powerful. There's also a world always in every country of people who depend on things to be sort of like they are. They pull the strings, the NGOs, some of them. I know in Quebec it was very hard because pulling off that walk, we were being denounced and being, threatened by big environmental organizations for whom we were like players in their field and not understanding, and they were calling the shots, and they had an agreement with an opposition party to get their minister. They had a plan, which I can understand, but we had a plan that they didn't understand. That's basically how you can say it. But 15,000 people ended up with us, including people mobilized by these NGOs, who at the end thought, if we don't show up near the end with the flag, we're going to look ridiculous. So sometimes allies can be brought in that aren't always, totally with you to start with. So, I mean, there's a whole process also following government study after government study. This is one of the signs we held in front of one of those study commissions to tell them, we're watching you. I want to get to that later part. Control Risks is this international consultancy on movements around fracking. They assess risk for those investors in the field. And they gave us a very flattering description, saying we were one of the most sophisticated initiatives. I mean, there's so few of us, it makes me almost, laugh. But because we have a system and we're planning blockades, which they know as an industry, they're sitting ducks. They have to drill 24/7 for weeks at a time, and blockades have been used with high levels of success elsewhere in the world, including Australia, including the UK, and other places. So we thought we should apply that model. So we created a 3-part system of Vigil surveillance, an alert system, and devised what you could call a deterrent action system. Let me go through it quickly. The early warning system is just a website. It's got a big red button. You see something, tell us, like the airport people here say. See something, say something. And there's an email list and all that.
This was to enforce the moratorium, yeah?
Yes, because what I have to say is also the fracking stopped once we got to Montreal. The pressure had risen to that level that the minister for the first time said, we're not going to frack until, further advice. Before that, it was always, yeah. Second thing, civil disobedience trainings, which allowed us to reach a lot of the citizens on the ground. And the trainings were, remember the Pledge of Resistance, some of you, against the invasion of Nicaragua in the 80s? Oh, I'm too old, I'm sorry. But this is the principle that people who did the training had a little diploma. They love that stuff. Everybody does. You'll get a diploma here. You'll love it. So a little diploma and a pledge of resistance, saying for the next 5 years, if the industry comes back, we'll be joining in action at the best of our capacity. And it could be support. It could be feeding the people. It could be housing them. Or it could be getting arrested. So then we were on to the next phase, is what is the plan if they come back? So rapid deployment plans. How do we surveil? How do we map this? Where are people going to stay? How are they going to be fed? Transportation. So there's all these support roles which make direct action look less scary. Like, I'm not getting arrested. But I will join your thing if that means, I cook a big lasagna or chili. Got it? And we mapped all these possibilities of action. But another area for innovation was the use of video. We created these citizens would get to, instead of having meetings upon meetings, to devise their plan, they do participatory video. There's some really good websites, Insights Share in the UK, does trainings with that. My partner went through their training. So it's basically you give the cameras to people. You show them how it works, you know, the basic rundown of how to film, you know, this, you know. And then they make the video. And this is a video which I don't have time to show, but that shows how the community is prepared if the fracking companies, the gas companies, come to the community. Then you have these people saying, I will feed them. I will attach myself to equipment. I will, you know, here's my house and people can stay here. Oh, I have all this space for camping. And so that the whole concept of it, if I can summarize, is that of nonviolent deterrence. A credible threat of mass mobilization that prevents the thing. It's an adaptation of a whole concept of social defense. Civilian-based defense is, you know, to prevent an invasion, and this is an invasion. You prepare people on the ground with strategy and tactics for next time when they come. See where this is going? So we just thought this would be a good thing to add in the mix as you think of yourself about campaigns and how to sequence tactics and things. Because we are not condemned at the, you know, oh, here they come. We haven't planned. What are we going to do? We throw ourselves and there's no support. So this is a way to step back, organize, think creatively. So thank you. Thank you for your time.